Hello, Connective. Today we're doing a combined high vibe deck and getting into the Vortex deck reading. I moved the microphone, so hopefully, well, most likely it'll sound different, but hopefully it'll sound better. Okay, so first card that fell is our source is one of love, not condemnation. I think we have gotten that one before, but I don't know. I know I'm not getting this like a familiar vibe from it, so we'll see what's coming from the high vibe deck. Okay, and remember, this is the deck where we rate our vibration and then we do the exercise that's on the cards, and then rate our vibration again, and if we perceive it to be similar, then we do the exercise again, or so low would be the 1 would be the lowest vibration, and 10 would be a higher vibration before we do the reading. But let's see what card comes out. Just looking for one card on this one. So if more than one comes out, we're gonna get the first one that got away. See what's going on. Oh, they flipped over in my hands, but I'm not taking that. We're gonna keep trying to get one to jump out. Oh, let's see what we got. Low vibes. Low vibes. This is definitely a new card. All right. You know what? I think that it'll be easier. Okay, here, let me put these cards that I have in my hand down real quick. Okay, that's not the best idea. Okay. Yeah, let me read low vibes first. Things that lower your vibration: judgment, criticism, worry, self-judgment, being unkind. Pay attention to what you are saying. Focus on the good things happening around you. Nobody is perfect. Be gentle with yourself and try saying it in a positive, hopeful way. All right. And I just feel the need to point out that sometimes, not saying it all is fine. Not saying it at all is fine too. Not everything needs to be said. And as we talk about, with energy and, trying to manage your energy through your actions, you also want to manage your energy through, what stimulus you expose yourself to, and the things that you say. It's not just the things that you do, it's the things that you say too. It's the things that you allow to come into your energy field. So even if you're not low vibe, but you're allowing that to be around you, it's going to make an impact. And then, so this card is, our source is one of love, not condemnation. So similar message there. Let's see what it has to say. When you pay attention to the way you feel and deliberately choose more thoughts that feel good while you think them, you will begin to recognize the nature of your broader non-physical desires. The majority of negative emotions that you feel are not because the subject of your thought is wrong, but instead because you are condemning something that your source does not condemn. Your source is one of love, not one of condemnation. So I do feel that we've gotten this card, but I don't remember what we talked about, so I think it might have been like in a general read or something. But, this card is bringing up something we haven't really fully talked about. I'm just trying to find the words that they used. The subject, not because the subject of your thought is wrong, but instead because you are condemning something that your source does not condemn. Your source is one of love, not one of condemnation. Well, the loudest message here is, something that I did say in another video that I didn't really elaborate too much. I mean, I said it and I kind of explained what I was saying, but I didn't go into detail of it, was that I had said that life has no meaning. I said that you're here to give it meaning. Sometimes when you're in a spiritual awakening and certain like phrases will pop up that you've heard before, growing up or whatever, just things that people have said, and you understood it, but then, at one point on some other level, you completely understand it. When you hear it again, you go, oh, that's what that means, and I think that life has no meaning bothers people because it causes them to question their own existence. Like, if they're in life and life has no meaning, like, why would they be there, kind of thing. But what that life has no meaning, what that means, where it's coming from, is that things are neutral. Yes, and I've said before, yes, things happen that are like appalling, to people. Like they're like, wow, I wish that, this didn't happen in the world or whatever. And I get that. But if you also understand that you come down on this planet to, experience, to learn things through experiences that may be considered, less than, like we say, like what Abraham considers to be contrast, the things that we don't want. We say we don't want, but some of those things we chose to experience before we came down here because we wanted to learn something. And so, every time something happens, and it doesn't even have to be a bad thing, it could be like a good thing that people are happy about, but someone can look at it in a negative way, so if, say, a single person looks at everything in a negative way, well, first of all, they're going to get low vibes. They're going to be in low vibe. They're going to be that person that you're hanging around with that is never happy no matter what's going on. I've even caught people around me complaining about stuff that they don't care about. And they expect me to get into the conversation and perpetuate it with them. And I do not have energy for that. I do not do that. It's a cycle. It's a pattern that they run, that if they want to run, should run by themselves. Don't get sucked into stuff like that. You might think that someone's complaining about something that they're upset about, that you feel like you need to help them, this, that, and the other thing. When you start to realize that they're just complaining to kick that low vibe stuff up, a little bit of a different ball game as far as like what you want to give other people. And like I said, again, and what this card is saying, that, it's those, let me see the exact wording it used. The majority of negative emotions that you feel are not because the subject of your thought is wrong, but instead because you are condemning something that your source does not condemn. If you chose to experience something, let's just say that it's an abusive relationship. And you came down here and I hate this person, I hate this experience, I hate this. That's true. Your inner self, that part of you that is, eternal, that pure, energy part of you, it's not sitting, I was going to say in your brain, but wherever you think it sits, in your body, it's not sitting there and being like, yeah, I hate that person, I hate that experience. No, that's you, that's your 3D interpretation of that experience. And I get that. I get it. Especially if you're talking about like a situation of abuse, because it's really hard sometimes to experience something with someone. Like, I'm talking about like abuse from another person. So, that person's in it too. Like, even if they're not the one that's being abused, they see what's happening. Most of the time you would hope so. And sometimes you're kind of like, what? This isn't really, and really develop some feelings towards it, especially when you're in it. But when you come out of it, you look back and you realize, how much of a different person that you, like, say, are as you're looking back on that experience. A lot of times, why you realize why, as the person you are now, why you wouldn't put up with that. And a lot of it has to do with that low vibe stuff. It has to do with buying into other people's patterns and cycles, especially if you're like an empath. You might feel like you're helping them out, helping a person out, just by listening to them. But I'll tell you, even if you think you're sitting around like not exerting your energy because you're just sitting and listening to somebody, you are still giving them your energy. If you're giving them your attention, what you pay attention to. So remember, what you pay attention to is what grows. So if you think, well, I'm not going to, feed into this, but I'll let that person vent, and, especially if it's something that you allow like multiple times in your life, because, that person comes to you because you let them. If you were not available one day, just out of the blue, your phone wasn't charged, you didn't realize you never got the call, they would call someone else. So really think about that when you're thinking about, whether or not somebody actually needs your help, and if this person just complains, if they're just, I was trying to look for the difference of the two words between, when someone's like basically unloading or dumping and venting. They are sort of two different things. And technically, when a volcano is venting, a little bit of steam comes out, and then it kind of goes back to being itself or whatever. When it doesn't do that enough, it gets kind of explosive. But dumping is like literally driving your truck up there and just opening up the back. And these things again are described as judgment, criticism, worry, self-judgment, being unkind, condemnation. So if you look at the two things separately, in other words, let's say in your life let's say you did have somebody that was close to you who just was always like just never happy. Like maybe it was a relationship you had, and you kind of learned the hard way that no matter what you do, sometimes people are never happy. Like sometimes people are just never happy, or you learn that you can't please all the people all the time, something like that, and you kind of got out of there. So you were like, you know what? I choose to be happy. If other people around me don't want to be happy, that's fine. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to worry about me and whether or not I'm happy. It might take you a whole separate time or a whole separate instance or a whole separate person to learn that you can assign good or bad meanings to things if you want to. You don't have to assign the meaning that everyone else has. There's a lot of different things that could happen that, let's say, by your perspective, it's not a big deal. But for some people, it's huge. So then you try to like talk about whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, and you get caught up because of their strong like opinions of what you're talking about. I'm trying to I want to name some things, but I'm not sure if you'll receive it in a way, because you might think, well, everybody thinks the same about that. Like if I was like, the first thing I was thinking was aliens, because I had made a comment in another video about how if people don't believe something, they may not see it, even if they're standing next to somebody who says, look, don't you see, it's aliens, and they're like, well, I don't even believe in that, I can't see that kind of thing, So it is kind of one of those things where it's like, you could believe that aliens are bad, or you could believe that aliens are good. You have one person who believes this. Yeah, well, again, for the specific situation that we're talking about right now, if the aliens are right in front of you, you might want to consider him bad, good. I was gonna say consider him good, until they prove themselves evil was what I was gonna say, because ultimately. We talk, I say, now that I can shoot a little bit longer videos, we talk about the flip side of this. Do you want to block an experience? It doesn't have to be meeting aliens. It could be anything. Do you want to block an experience of anything just because you perceived the introduction of it as something that was negative, or any kind of lower vibration, sad, anything, being open to how you look at things. Sometimes, and it's sort of unrelated in what we're talking about, meditation. But if you meditate, pretty regularly, you will automatically raise your vibration. So it could be if you did meditate, let's just say 20 minutes a day. After a while, this noise, these people around you that are making this noise, you won't want to be around them anyway. It would naturally, come to you to not experience that. You just wouldn't want to. But I was also going to say that, when you do, say, raise your vibration, and other things too, like if you just kept yourself in a state where you were always happy, it's, your vibration might stay the same, but you would look at things in a way that was more positive anyway. Even if things were falling apart, I use the wedding example a lot, but really here, the wedding example is a great example because, a lot of times from what I've seen, women, when things are going wrong, they'll freak out, and I get the whole, I've put a lot of effort in this is planning a very important moment in my life. For some people, they actually recognize that milestone or that rite of passage as its own entity. So if it gets kind of messed up, that's how they view it, and I do get all of that. But ultimately, I think sometimes they kind of get caught up in what's happening to the wedding plans themselves, what's happening to the plans. And it could be anything, and it could be everything. People who've tried to get married in the last couple of years know what I'm talking about. Even when you could actually get married again, it was plans would fall through and things would happen, it was harder than it normally would be. So I get that, especially if you've experienced it, when I want to say fairly recently, but I want to say too that I think sometimes people forget that they're getting married. It's it's such a great thing. I get that things are happening that are upsetting, I can't think of a specific thing right now, but sure, things that actually ruin the experience to the point where it either never happens, or when it does happen, it's such a disaster that people actually want to do it over again. And I get that too. But just entertain a concept for me really quick. Just what if let's say that you didn't really care. You of course you cared about your wedding, but let's just say that you the real gift for you was the marriage, okay? And the wedding was kind of let's say you didn't even really want a wedding, but you were afraid if you didn't invite say your parents or whatever, that they would feel left out of your life in some way. Let's just put it like that. And so you do it, but you do it for them. You do it in a way where they would want to experience it. You don't go to the beach and just invite your parents. You have a wedding, But let's say that it just completely falls apart. Even if everything was planned to the T and there was no mistakes, nobody ever came back and said, hey, this food's not going to be available, or, we didn't get this shipment of this in time. None of that happens. But then let's say the day of, systematically, the whole ceremony just starts shutting down, right? In a situation where the person doesn't really care about it, they're just kind of doing it for other people, they're gonna spend the day maybe not right away, depending on what's happening in the situation, but at some point when people start to leave the party, or when it gets bad enough, the person who say is the bride or the groom, whoever we're talking about right now, whichever person, they're going to start apologizing to their guests as they leave. I'm so sorry this happened. I'm so sorry. Because they're more worried about disappointing their guests, because ultimately they did it for them. They already know that this person that they're married to, this can be so much fun from here on out. This little ceremony thing is just whatever. You know what I mean? And so it's one of those things where if you just looked at it, and yes, I do mean this as like the wedding falling apart. But if you just looked at it as, oh, these things happen, and, I guess it wasn't meant to go off exactly the way I wanted it to, but, wasn't that funny when this happened? Or, whatever the situation, I mean, I've joked around about a lot of stuff at times when I'm like, I don't even know why you see that funny. But, it does. It helps me kind of like skate through and look at the situation sometimes for what it is. Sometimes when something happens that really is jarring, I'm not just talking about situations where you can control the way you're thinking and somebody comes out and they, do something crazy at you, and then you kind of like respond in your head like, wow, what was that, blah, blah, and you say something to yourself that's like comical about the other person that just really shines the light on what people bring you sometimes and what they expect you to accept. And even when they do that, you don't have to look at it and go, well, everybody's garbage. You can just decide not to deal with that, deal with the people you want to deal with, look at situations in a high vibe state so that more of this doesn't come towards you. Because you can get rid of the old people, but if you don't drop this, new people are going to come in, they're going to bring this with them. So, just look at things sometimes even for how they are. Don't put a meaning on it. Just look at it, see what happens. Sometimes when things happen, bad things happen to people and they're telling their story and they're just, they're really like shaken. And sometimes I'm like listening to it and I'm like, that is so random. Why did this happen in that situation, And then when you hear more of the story, you find out it's law of attraction. So don't let anything that happens take on a negative tone. Yes, sometimes it can put you sometimes you can not give it a negative tone and just have this like foul feeling that you're carrying with you, throughout the day. Or, into the next day in some cases. But I will also tell you, even though I do understand that, a good way to handle something like that too is if you really just can't, the way you feel, something happened that was, you have to honor the way you feel. Definitely don't, when you like go to bed and you get up the next morning, don't put, that shirt that you wore on yesterday. Don't drag yesterday's energy into today in any way, shape, or form. Make sure that if you do have a bad day or if something that you perceive to be a bad day, if your wedding fails, crashes to the ground, make sure you take a bath and get that off of you before you get into your bed. Do not put your wedding dress on the next day. So, keep that in mind too. Like if you do get to that point where you're just like sort of consumed and you just can't. I had a situation like that for me, and I'm pretty balanced, but I knew for a few days I was just going to be bummed out, and that's just the way it was. And I did my best to not judge situations and to raise my vibration, because it was part of my healing process, and I didn't want to dwell in it. So consider that. Consider the meaning that you give things and what vibration it has. If it doesn't feel good, change it. Your inner self doesn't like that meaning that you gave it, or you're thinking about something too much that you shouldn't be because you don't like it. Don't focus on that. And just try to keep your vibration up until we meet again.